Today is a good day. Today is build day. We are going to build an amazing machine, a double custom water cooling machine. And if you've been around my channel long enough, you know that, every once in a blue moon I like to do a build and document it through this series. But instead of going to my usual TT900 Super Tower, which we've been building and destroying and building and destroying way too many times, I decided to get something new, a new chassis, a new case, which is equally as crazy and eccentric friendly. And today's build will be based on the glorious PC011D XL from Lian Li, an eccentric box of goodness made to give wings to your best and worst ideas. And lucky for us, EKWB has graciously accepted to send me a bunch of their latest goodies, including its unreal, beautiful, imposing Distroplate custom made for this chassis. This is going to be insane. What the f just happened? So the whole theme of the build will be monochrome, a fun contrast between black and white, exactly the very same theme I've used on my last TT900 build, which is not as easy as it sounds. And I am going soft tubing on this one again. I do have a soft spot for soft tubes, because I just love the way it looks, the organic field. It almost makes me believe my computer is alive with veins and arteries. And in the future, I probably will upgrade this build on camera with a rigid tubing, but I know you and you are going to give me some hard love because I'm using a Distroplate with soft tubing. So go ahead, murder me on the comment section below. Now going back onto the case, the PC011D is a good looking case and allows an unprecedented amount of configuration. But it's also a difficult case to work with because it's a mid-tower case or something like that, and it gets really cramped really quickly. Hence the importance of wisely choosing the components who's gonna fit in this chassis, and I think I've done a pretty good job. Starting with the ROG Maximus 13 Hero, which provides a lot of troubleshooting features, always a plus when it comes to a custom water-cooled machine. It will be powered by an i7 11700K from Intel for some insane gaming and PCIe 4.0 compatibility, and an RTX 3080 OC from PNY for some limitless ray tracing yumminess, or almost. When prepping a build, I usually start with a power supply unit, but in our case, see what I done there? We got this massive larger-than-life Distroplate, which we have to install, and that's where we're going to start. First, I can't emphasize enough how impressive the thing is. It is large, it is thick, it is heavy, so handle with care. It can support 2 completely independent loops, one for your CPU and one for up to 3 video cards. That is a lot of heat indeed! Hence the immense reservoir which will occupy the full front panel of our case. Now note that it also comes with a rather large RGB strips which covers its full perimeter, and it looks awesome. Now I do need to point out that its installation in this PC011D XL is, well, tight, and you need to make sure to remove all of the panels and this bracket before trying to fit it in. And even then, it's a really tight fit, so make sure to go slow to avoid damaging either the case or the Distroplate. It is secured in position by only a couple of screws, which again have not been placed in the most accessible areas, but hey, such is the price you need to pay to build an enthusiast rig. But one thing is certain is that once installed, this thing will completely change the aesthetic of your case. I mean, look at this, it's absolutely gorgeous. Heavy duty, industrial. Now next, we are going to put our power supply in it, making sure that its fan is facing toward the case opening. Then I am partially placing the GPU vertical mount. And I do that because the case, motherboard, and the vertical mount comes from different manufacturers. And even though they're usually very good at making sure everything fits together, there are some problems. So if the motherboard fits the case after that, you know that you are in the clear. And talking of which, before sliding the motherboard in, I usually try to populate populate it with as much components as I can, which in this case is the CPU, the RAM, 64GB of it, and the M.2 solid-state drive sticks, two 1TB modules in our case. Now, for the CPU cooling solution, EKWB has sent its latest EK Quantum Velocity water block. Installation-wise, there's nothing special to it, simply make sure to align the backplate to the provided screws, apply a generous amount of thermal paste, remove the plastic film from the water block, and secure the whole thing with the 4 provided thumb screws. Now, I went for the black finish to accentuate the monochrome contrast of my build and underline its industrial feel. So memory-wise, I have decided to go with 4 Vengeance RGB Pro sticks of 16GB DDR4 each, rated at 3.2 GHz. Now, for aesthetics reasons only, I decided to mix low standing sticks and normal size ones to create a bit of relief, which I think looks pretty cool. As for the storage, I'm placing my 2 EVO sticks on the last M.2 solid-state drive slots for an easier access and future upgrade. Once all done, slide the motherboard in and secure it in place with its 7 screws. See how fast and easy this is? Well, things are about to get really complex really quickly. Our next move is to install our GPU water block and backplate, and to stay in the industrial monochrome feel of the build, I decided to go with the all-black EK Quantum Vector water block. And again, I love its metal finish and its apparent torque screws, which again give that industrial feel I'm going after. Now, if this is your first time, I would strongly suggest you watch that next part before touching anything. Make sure you understand what I'm doing so that, you don't break anything in the process, because once you remove those screws from your GPU, warranty is void, and that's all up to you to decide if that's worth it. Now, in order to separate the GPU air block from its PCB, we are going to remove all of its visible screws. When trying to separate the air block from the PCB, you will feel a bunch of resistance, and don't try to just whack it open. There's still cables in there, so the best way to do it is to apply an even pulling force and wait for the card to slowly open up. Alright, so next we're going to take our PCB and remove its existing thermal pads and clean the thermal paste residue. And here comes the most delicate part of this operation. We are going to install all the different thermal pads on the PCB components, respecting their individual thickness. And this is really crucial to ensure full adherence between the warmest components and the water block. In short, make sure to get this right, because if you don't, you're gonna find out very quickly, very sadly. Now, after securing the blocks to the PCB with its screws, we are going to prepare the backplate. The RTX 3080 being a notoriously hot video card, the backplate needs to be equipped with additional thermal pads as well. Again, you will need to ensure the thermal pad's thickness is conform to the installation manual. Now we can secure the backplate to the PCB, and voila, our RTX 3080 is now ready for its water cooling. Now do take the time to do a quick visual inspection of the block, making sure that no screws stands out and that the thermal pads are well sandwiched between the components and the block. Now back to the build. Keep in mind that our GPU is now very heavy, so if you are not going to install a radiator below it, make sure to use a video card support holder. But in my case, I did decide to provide both the CPU and GPU with their dedicated radiators, and that's where we are heading next. EKWB had the good idea of sending me a couple of their low-profile Coolstream rads, a 360 for the CPU and a 240 for the GPU. Now, as fans go, I went for the LL120 RGB series from Corsair. They come in white and can move an obscene amount of hair at low and almost silent 2200 RPM. Now, after securing the fans onto your radiator, we can secure them to the case. The upper one necessitates no added elements, unlike the bottom one, which needs to be secure on the case bracket before insertion. Now comes the very tricky part of tubing all of our water components, and this is where the Distroplate really shines. Instead of trying to cramp in 2 pumps and 2 separate reservoirs, the Distroplate allows us a simpler and cleaner layout. Just make sure to identify the right in and outlets and your loop is set. Now, if this is your first time, I know this can look and sound impressive, but it's really not that complex. Simply measure the length, cut your tubes, and insert your fitting. Make sure to fully secure your fitting to ensure a watertight seal, and move on to the next components. Now, starting from the top, we are going to connect the 360mm radiator to the Distroplate. Then comes the CPU and its in and outlets. Next, we go to the GPU, which is a little trickier to align with the Distroplate, but is no more complex. And finally, I will be connecting its 240mm radiator, which should align perfectly with the Distroplate thanks to some extensions. Then make sure to have a 24-pin short, which will allow us to start the power supply unit and get our pump going. Liquid-wise, I use deionized water bought from a pharmacy. It simply means non-conductive water, so if you do experience a leak in the future, your components will remain safe. Now for coolant, EKWB sent me the Cryofull Solid White Concentrate. I usually mix it to a ratio of 1:2 or 1:3 depending on what the end result looks like. And now moving on to the filling of our loops. First, place generous amounts of absorbent papers around your most expensive components to avoid water contact in case of any obvious leaks. And now we can start filling our Distroplate. Make sure that the pump is fully submerged in water before turning on your power supply unit. And as you turn it on, the pump starts circulating the water through the loops. So make sure to add more water so that the pump remains fully immersed at all time. Once the Distroplate is about half filled, let it run for a couple of hours to make sure that indeed you have a tightly sealed setup. Finally, I can start adding my EKWB white concentrate, which will give that opaque white texture to our water. Keep in mind that filling the entire loop might take some time. The Distroplate reservoir alone is 800mm big, and add to that about 500mm worth of liquid for the radiators and different water blocks. In total, our loop will transport a massive 1.3 liters worth of coolant mix. Feed it up to the fill hole and again let it run for another couple of hours for the loop to get rid of any air bubble trapped in our loops. The final stage is to disconnect our power supply unit completely, connect all of our PSU cables on the corresponding components, and finally start your PC and praise the tech gods for a boot. And if it does work, well, this is the right moment to tap yourself on the back and tell yourself that not having a girlfriend was finally worth it. Now, the interesting part. What does having such an expensive and complex cooling solution means performance-wise? Well, starting with the CPU, compared to an all-in-one cooling solution, our 11700K clocked at 5.2 GHz manages to stay at about 70 degrees Celsius after a 60-minute stress test, 8 to 10 degrees lower than on a higher-end all-in-one. But where you will see the biggest difference is with the GPU, which halves its GPU die temperatures and most importantly keeps its memory around 56 degrees Celsius after a 45-minute stress test. That is 30 degrees Celsius less than on its air block. And obviously that will give you a lot of overclocking room, which I absolutely did on this poor video card. And even at severely increased memory and GPU, the temperatures remain below 65 degrees Celsius at all time. In short, your components can both run faster, safely, and last longer. But most importantly, this build shows how beneficial a partnership between a case manufacturer and a water cooling company can be. The Distroplate offers both an easier, cleaner setup and a better looking one. Our case goes from aesthetically pleasing to OMFG, this is so cool. The EKWB Quantum Velocity and Vector Water Block provide insane temps result, but most importantly looks awesome doing it. My only concern here is that soft tubing is really not ideal for Distroplate build. Even though it is easier to maintain and offers more flexibility to your build, it really doesn't look as neat and clean as in a rigid tubing configuration. Precisely why you will be seeing a second video of this very build in a solid tubing configuration. In short, stay tuned.